So like I said, we are finishing up our Connect to Truth series today. And the sermon is, why do bad things happen? And often we add this phrase, why do bad things happen to good people? Now, I'll be honest, most of us, if bad things happen to quote-unquote bad people, even if we don't say it, we don't care. I mean, if something bad happens to a criminal, our response is, well, don't be an idiot and be a criminal. That's what you get. You deserved that. So when bad things happen to quote-unquote bad people, it's not a big deal. But what happens when it happens to you, your relatives, your friends, people that you love, and bad things happen to them? Then we begin to ask that question. God, why are bad things happening? Why are you letting this happen? And we may even look to God and think, God, why are you punishing me like this? Why are you doing this to me? And many of us ask or think this question, God, don't you even care about me? When bad things are happening, God, don't you even care about me? So why do bad things happen to good people? Well, there's many things in life that start with the wrong premise. And actually that question, why do bad things happen to good people? The problem is actually in the question. The question itself is kind of flawed, and there's all kinds of questions that are naturally flawed because of some belief. For instance, if bread always lands buttered side down if you drop it, and cats always land on their feet, what happens if you strap buttered bread to the back of a cat? Try that out later. I mean, you've heard questions like that. There's some questions that are inherently flawed, like this. Why isn't phonetics spelled the way it sounds? Why are there interstate highways in Hawaii? You'll get that later. Why are there flotation devices under plane seats instead of parachutes? Why are cigarettes sold in gas stations when smoking is prohibited there? One of my personal favorites is, do you need a silencer if you're going to shoot a mime? Yeah. We do not advocate mime abuse. All right. Another one of my favorites, have you ever imagined a world with no hypothetical situations? Deep, I like that one. If 7-Eleven is open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, why are there locks on the door? And if a cow laughed, would milk come out its nose? And the famous question we've all heard before, if nothing ever sticks to Teflon, how does Teflon stick to the pan? And so all these questions, while funny, they're inherently flawed, just like the question we asked, why do bad things happen to good people? You see, the flaw is actually the end of it, the phrase good people. We all have our definition of what good and bad is, but our definition of good and bad, honestly, doesn't really matter. God's matters, and this is what God says about it. Romans 3:9-11 says this. For what shall we conclude then? Do we have any advantage? Not at all. For we have already made the charge that Jews and Gentiles alike are all under the power of sin. As it is written, there is no one righteous, no, not even one. There is no one who understands, there is no one who seeks God. So Romans tells us we're all the same. That means we're all sinners and no one is righteous. I hate to break it to you, you're not good. Oh, I'm not good. None of us are good by God's standards because we are all sinners. So this notion that this person is good and they shouldn't have any bad things happen to them just isn't true because none of us are good. There is no one that is good in God's eyes. We're all sinners. So the first assumption that anyone should be immune to bad things happening because of how they have lived their life, we see that's a faulty belief. So let's start over. Let's start over with this. Why do bad things happen to anyone, including Christians who have put their faith in God? Why doesn't God just stop bad things from happening? I mean, I thought he loved us. I thought he cared about us. Why does this stuff happen? Well, here's the first reason. Why? Is because we live in a fallen world. We live in a fallen world. Sin was brought into the world by us, and it continues to cause problems. Life was perfect before sin, but that all changed. Romans 5:12 says this. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned. Now that sin is in the world, everything is tainted. Not only us, but the world itself. There are natural disasters that hurt people, that cause pain and kill people and destroy things. That's no one's fault because we live in a fallen world. Bad things happen. We live in a fallen world, and that is the root of all our problems. And that's the overarching answer, but there's more. On top of that, the reason we have bad things is because we don't use God's wisdom. We don't use God's wisdom. We know what choices we should make, and yet we choose wrong. And choosing wrong means sinning against God. Romans 3:23 says this, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." You see, sin hurts because not only breaking a relationship with God, but there are tangible problems when we sin. For instance, if I did drugs, it's illegal, first of all, but there's physical issues that could hurt me. There are relational issues. There's all kinds of different issues that I have because I may have chosen to sin. You see, not using God's wisdom makes life hard for us. God has given us free will to make these choices, but the problem with free will is He's also given it to other people. I don't know about you. I love free will for me. I don't like it so much for other people. I like to get to choose what I want to do. I don't like your choices. But God says, you know what? I've given free will to everybody, and that means I get to choose poorly or good. But what that also means is other people get to choose poorly or good. You see, that's another problem we have is this. Others don't use God's wisdom. Others don't use God's wisdom. Other people choose to do bad things that affect us and cause us pain. For example, a man embezzles money from a company, and the entire company has to shut down and puts all these employees out of work. One person's poor choices has hurt so many other people and families. You see, that's what can happen by one person's poor choices. And we see it all the time in the news. The bad choices people make hurt others. And they choose not to use God's wisdom and hurt many people, not just their poor choices, but their words or general carelessness. You see, other people can cause us major problems. It's funny, 2 Thessalonians actually says this. "And pray that we may be delivered from wicked and evil people, for not everyone has faith." You see, we have free will, and we can choose, but that means other people can choose as well. Not everyone will follow God like we do, and their decisions can make life bad for us. So without God allowing us to make choices in this idea of free will, then when our choices are removed, we can't have free will anymore. You see, there cannot be free will without the possibility of bad things happening. If you take somebody, put them in a room with the white padded walls, you always have this picture, and they just sit there, you have not given them any choices. They do not have free will because they are in this structured environment that does not give them options. And God chose to limit His power in one way, by giving us free will. You see, when God created man, He set the tree there of knowledge of good and evil and said, this is an option for you. I'm going to give you a choice. You can choose to sin or not sin. If that tree was not there, then there was no choice. And what that meant is we would not actually love God. We would be forced into loving God. Does that make sense? We wouldn't actually have a choice, so we would just have to love God. And God says, no, I don't want that. I want to give you a choice. You can choose to love me, or you can choose not to. And Adam chose to sin, and he chose to reject God. And God says, this free will that I have given you, it causes a lot of problems. Causes a lot of problems. Because I'm giving you options. And you may not do what I want you to do, but I'm going to give you the option to choose to do that. And so free will is central to the problem of why we have bad things in the world. Because when we make bad choices, there are bad consequences. But still, okay, yes, we make bad choices, but isn't God powerful enough to stop bad things? So why in the world would all these bad things happen? Don't we have a loving God? Why does He make life so hard? Can't He just fix this so everything would be great? That leads us right into that major question. Why does God let bad things happen? And we have more resources we can provide you, but why does God let these bad things happen? Well, first, the entire question is really kind of the issue. The question has some assumptions in it, and I want us to reframe it and think about it another angle. So, for instance, you have light and you have dark. What is dark? It is the absence of light, okay? And so that is the light is gone, so it makes it dark. It's the same in our world. The absence of good is evil. Now, here's something you may not have known. When God created the world, he gave it to Adam and Eve. He said, you are over this. I created it and you get to run it. And Adam chose to bring sin into the world. The Bible tells us, through one man, sin came into the world. And so this is our area, and we as people in this world have a choice. We can bring God into the world, or we can push God out. And there's a lot of people in the world that don't want God here. And we see this actually continuing, growing more and more. And God says, well, I'm not going to force myself on you. I gave you free will. And if you don't want me there, then I won't be there. That's why praying is so important, for God's power to be in the world. So when God is gone, we see more evil. When God's light is not there, we see more dark. And so this idea that God allows bad stuff to happen and he should stop it is actually us pushing God out. It presupposes that living a pain-free life is the goal. We think, God should come in and I shouldn't have any pain. If he loved me, he would not make me have pain. This idea that we are supposed to not have any problems and that God's goodness will push out the dark regardless of what we want, regardless of what we choose. But there's a big problem with that thinking. It's free will. We bring in sin with our poor choices. And the outcome of this are questions like this. Maybe somebody's asked this. Well, they were in this car wreck, and why did the people in the car wreck have to die? Doesn't God care about them? Why would he have to do that? And the options are this. What would God do? Would you have God, make the cars turn into two pillows and they hit each other, kind of bounce off, and everybody walks away? Or what would happen if, let's say, a police officer and a bad guy were shooting at each other? Would the bad guy's bullet turn to rubber if it hit the police officer because he's the good guy and bounces off, but the police officer's bullet hits the bad guy and stops him? Is that what God would do if he was going to take away all our pain? Well, how would that even work? Should God be involved in everything, every decision that happens? But you see, he can't, because you know what he did? He said, I am going to give you choices, and I'm going to allow you to live out those choices. Now, you're going to choose things that I don't like. You're going to do stuff that's really bad, but I'm going to let you choose that. And there are consequences to those choices. You see, God cannot put us in a protective shell and then pretend like we have free will. That's not how it works. We can either be completely free or we can be completely safe. We can't be both. We can be completely free or we can be completely safe, but we can't have both. You see, freedom brings risks. That is why we have issues of people shooting people or some other terrible tragedy, because we have freedom, and freedom allows bad choices. So why doesn't God shield us from this bad, hurtful stuff around us? Well, here's why. As Christians, why wouldn't God just say, you don't have to deal with that stuff, you follow me? Well, because, you see, stopping the process to avoid consequences isn't always the most loving thing. I have 4 boys, and as they were beginning to walk, they would fall down. One of our boys has a giant head, and he was like top heavy, and so he just kept falling down, and he'd have these big goose eggs on his head all the time. And so he's little, he's taller, and all the kids, every kid, whenever you have kids, they're falling down when they're trying to walk, and they fall over, and they bump their elbow, their face, they bloody their lips, they always hit the teeth, when they're trying to walk, and they hurt themselves, and I had a couple options. When they were walking, I could have said, no, don't try to walk. You'll hurt yourself. I don't want you to have any pain. I don't want you to have those bumps on your head. I don't want you to skin your knee, so I'll just carry you everywhere you go. Well, here's the problem with that. That doesn't work for very long. They're going to be disabled because of what I've done, thinking I'm stopping their pain, and to be honest, I can't pick them up anymore. I tried one of them. I think I threw my back out the other day. I can't do that. And so I thought I was stopping the pain. But the reality is, the only way to get to maturity and the only way to get to where they need to be in life is to get through that pain. That temporary pain allowed them to actually get where God wanted them to be able to be active. You see, the pain was worth the end result. Taking care of all the kids' problems isn't helping them or even like doing their homework for them. They won't learn anything and they'll never grow. It is okay to work through the struggle, because the end result is worth it. Removing all pain is not an answer to getting us to where we need to be. One day a man saw a caterpillar begin to emerge from its cocoon, and it was taking a while and it was struggling. So the man thought to himself, I will help, and he went over with a pair of scissors and he began to snip the cocoon. And then the butterfly crawled out, but all it ever did was crawl. You see, the stress of the struggle was intended to push colorful, life-giving juices back into the wings. But because the man cut the process short, the butterfly, who was meant to fly on rainbow's wings through the sky, he was condemned to spend its brief life crawling in the dust. You see, stopping the struggles and removing all pain is not the best in many ways. So equating love with the lack of struggle or the lack of all pain is a faulty assumption. I loved my kids enough for them to bump their head while they were learning to walk. God does that to us. He goes, I love you enough to allow this pain so that you can get to here. So getting rid of all pain is a faulty assumption. You see, God loves us enough to give us choices, even if it brings pain. He says, I love you enough to let you choose what you want to do. But here's the thing, when we hear the word pain, we always think it's a negative. I know you're like, I'm not a masochist. I don't like pain. Most of us don't like pain, but actually pain is a positive. There's a book by Philip Yancey called Where is God When It Hurts? And Philip Yancey is talking to Dr. Paul Brand. Now, you may not know that name. He is one of the world's leading authorities on leprosy. Now, I don't know about you, but when I heard leprosy, when I was a kid, I used to think that meant like your body parts just fell off. Like you're walking down the street and you're like, oops, there goes my finger. Like I thought that's kind of what leprosy was, but that's not what leprosy is at all. Here's what leprosy is. Leprosy is actually the lack of feeling in nerves. So you don't feel anything. Let me give you an example. Some of Dr. Brand's patients, one of them, he liked designer shoes. So he'd get brand new designer shoes. He liked to dress up. Well, because he could not feel pain in his feet, his shoes eventually wore his foot, all the toes off into a point because he couldn't feel the pain. Another one of the leprosy patients had burned his eyes out because he put hot water in his hands, not realizing it was even hot, and put it on his face and burned his eyes out. You see, leprosy is so bad because they don't feel pain. Another would mop, and he rubbed a hole right through his hand from the mop handle because he didn't feel pain. And there were still others who they couldn't figure it out. And the next morning they would wake up with less digits than they went to bed with, and they video recorded and realized rats were gnawing them off in the middle of the night. But they couldn't feel it. And the problem was they didn't have any pain. They couldn't feel what was going on around them, and so they couldn't stop. For the rest of us, if we were mopping and we got a blister, we would stop, or we would put a Band-Aid, or we would do something because we can feel pain. And for the biggest curse that you can imagine on these people is the fact that they could not feel pain. And many of us are like, what? Isn't that a good thing? You can't feel pain, but then we can see what their life is like without pain. You see, no pain meant no change in behavior. So Dr. Brand and his team, they decided, of engineers and doctors, they were trying to find a way to help these people. How can we make it so that they don't have these issues, like they don't wear their toes down or burn their faces? What can we do? So they came up with some ideas. They tried a pressure glove. And the glove would make a sound or show flash lights if there was a certain amount of pressure. But there's a problem. I mean, how do you tell the difference between the pressure it takes to turn a doorknob versus the pressure of pushing on the point of a nail that could go right through your finger? You can't. And so it could cause damage like that. And then they also realized that even with the sounds or lights, the people would ignore them or turn them off. They would just ignore the lights and the sounds and the warnings and turn them off. You see, they could ignore what they wanted to, but we can't ignore pain. We can't ignore pain. It stops us. It makes us rethink our actions or direction. It slows us down. That is actually one of the great gifts of pain, is that we can't turn it off. And because we can't ignore it, we don't continue to hurt ourselves worse. I mean, if you can't feel pain, you could have a broken leg and walk on it, and it would just be terrible, or it had to be amputated eventually. But see, God gave us pain. And I know what you're thinking, oh, pain? I don't like pain. But God gave it to us for a reason, so that we don't hurt ourselves worse. You see, pain is actually one of the ways God protects us. It lets us know that something is wrong and prevents us from doing more damage. Pain is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing that helps keep us from getting hurt really bad. God created that in us so that we can live our life and function. Pain is a gift that actually protects us. So why is there pain and suffering? Well, we live in a fallen, sinful world. We and others have free will. Pain is part of the growing process, and pain can help us from getting really hurt. But that doesn't help my heart. Let's talk about feelings for a minute. And I'll be honest, I'm not a big feeling talker. Like, I don't go home and emote to my wife and just tell her all my feelings. No, it's hard to believe. But the feeling part of this, I struggle with too. I mean, think about it. This doesn't make me feel any better about the fact that I can't rationalize how a so-called loving God would allow a baby to die of cancer. What kind of God would do that? Like, what kind of God would do something like that? I mean, what's wrong with him, and why won't he stop it? And since he won't stop it, then my conclusion must be either he is not all-powerful or he is not all-loving. So which one is it? That'd be my conclusion. I mean, if God doesn't care that a baby dies of cancer, which one is it? Is he not all-powerful or is he not all-loving? And that's what it boils down to for many. This type of question, maybe somebody's asked you, maybe you've thought this, maybe you've asked somebody else, and maybe you've just wondered. But as we saw earlier, this is actually a faulty question and conclusion because it's starting at a certain point. Here's where this question is starting from. It's starting with this. It's starting with the presupposition that we should understand everything God does. And that if God doesn't make sense to me, then it can't be right. I don't understand it, God. If I don't understand it, and in my moral compass, I don't agree with what you are doing, then clearly you must be wrong, God. And I'll be honest. If I understand everything that God does, or why, or how, or what, he's pretty weak. Because I'm not that smart. I hate to break it to you, you're not that smart either. If we understand everything God does, and we have to agree with him for him to be God, he's a little God with a little g. Because God is so much more infinite than that, so powerful, so much more knowledge. And if the basics of me believing in him is whether I agree with him, that's a problem. That's a problem. And that's what this presupposes is, if I don't agree with what you do, then clearly you cannot be God. You see, that's humanistic. That's starting with the fact that we are top dogs. It comes from this humanistic philosophy that as humans, we make those decisions and we are in charge of everything, not him. So if the only way people will believe in God is if they can completely understand him, then he's weak. You see, my finite knowledge should not be able to understand the nature of God totally. So I don't have to agree with everything he does or he allows. But we know God can do anything. He created the world, so he definitely has the power to stop babies from dying of cancer, so why doesn't he? Why doesn't he? Well, we already talked about it. Because God says, I will limit my power and give you free will. And I will give you free will, and I will give you the consequences of your free will. So the consequences of our free will is sin. We've brought in sin in the world, and because of that, there are bad things that happen. You see, sin is the enemy, not God. God hates sin more than we do because he sees what it's doing to his loved creation. So you might be thinking, God doesn't love us because he allows this to happen, but then he does the one and only thing that can give us both free will and make us perfect and pain-free forever, and that is send his son. You see, God says, I'm giving you this gift of free will, but I'm also going to allow you to be pain-free forever. And the only way to do that is through Jesus. You see, we have freedom to choose bad things from the beginning, and that's prevented us from living the way God intended and the way he made us at creation. So he gave us a way to be perfect forever. For us to do that, we have to understand our future. You see, God has a better place prepared for us. Another book by Philip Yancey is this. In the book Disappointment with God, there's this great quote. It says this: It says, we all yearn for more justice in the world. A world that is fault-proof against disappointment. One where we don't feel our body get older. We don't see children born with birth defects, and we don't see our loved one dies. The book says this. But if I stake my faith on such a fault-proof earth, my faith will let me down. Even the greatest of miracles do not resolve the problems of this earth. You know Lazarus, the guy that Jesus brought back from the dead? I'm going to let you know a secret. He died. He died again. You know the people that Jesus healed? They died too. So a minor miracle isn't the key here. And we can't be looking for that. You see, all people who find physical healing eventually die. We need more than a miracle. We need a new heaven and a new earth. And until we have those, unfairness will not disappear. We are always going to have pain because we live in a sinful world with free will. But we have a new promise, a promise that everything will be new, everything will be perfect, and we can have peace knowing in the end that we get rest. We will get fair, we will get healing, and we will get to be with the Lord. And we can have a cheerful heart knowing that this is temporary pain, and we get to be perfect forever with God. Revelation 21 says this. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said this, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. You see, our future with God is one reason we can fight through a difficult world now. We have forever hope, and we have forever peace. But see, God doesn't say, you know what, just look to the future. That's one of my pet peeves as a pastor is, it seems like every time they preach, it's always about, hey, in 40 years, everything will be great. Whenever you die, everything is fine. No, the Christian life's about today. And God has a plan for us today. He has an immediate plan. He will allow us to use those difficult things that could have crushed our spirit to bring life to other people. The pain that we feel not only keeps us from worse pain, but it teaches us how to help others avoid the same pain. You see, we take this pain and this heartache and we use it to help someone else. We have to look for God in the difficult. And it's in the hard times that we can see God. It's during the difficult times we see our faith grow and understand what it feels like to rely on God. You see, disciples grow close to God during difficulties, and followers turn away when it gets tough. We have to get through the pain. Frederick Buechner said this, to be commanded to love God at all, let alone in the wilderness, is like being commanded to be well when we are sick, to sing for joy when we are dying of thirst, to run when our legs are broken. But this is the first and greatest commandment nonetheless. Even in the wilderness, especially in the wilderness, you shall love him. When we're in the wilderness, that's the time we need to seek God. He can lead us back to a heart of peace when we stay focused on him in the bad times. You see, we got to use our pain. I didn't write this down. I wasn't sure that I was going to use it, and I did first service, and I'm going to tell you guys this too. And I've told you before, and you may have heard. So back, Christy and I, we had a baby that was born prematurely, and she didn't make it, and we were struggling. It was hard for me. We were struggling. And during that time, very close in that same time frame, we had a young couple in church, much younger than us, like 19, 20, and they had lost twins in a small church from the exact same situation that we had had, just right in that time. And we were able to minister to them. And when other people came around and they would say, hey, we know how this feels, they look at, no, you don't. You don't know how this is. You've not been through this. But when we came around them and we said, we know how this feels, they said, yeah, we know you do. Yeah, you were there too. You've gone through this. And so we were able to minister to them, and we were able to show them that God has a plan and that God is a God of love. And I'll be honest, the only way that I was able to deal with my problem was to help share my pain and to help them. And I realized, man, this stinks. I hate this pain. Terrible. I'm angry at God. I'm mad. But I was able to use the pain that was in our life to help someone else, and God helped heal us through that process. Way too often, bad things happen and pain in life, and it's hard, and we just kind of pull our blanket over our head, and we sit there, oh, God, things are so bad. Things are terrible. And we just want to sit there and sit in our own pain instead of looking around and realizing, God's got a reason for this. But what can I do with this? I'm going to share with you guys my least favorite Bible verse. And I don't know if a pastor is supposed to have a least favorite Bible verse. but I do, so you can think less of me. It's in Romans. Let me tell you. It says this, Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Now, it's not my least favorite because I don't believe it. It's my least favorite because of how often it's used and when it's used. When people are in the middle of a terrible situation, well-meaning Christian friends come up to them and they say, hey, you know what? All things work for the good for those who love him. In that moment, here's what I want to say. I want to say, I don't care. I don't give a care at all. And actually, I'd probably be more crass and say the word care. I don't give a rip. That's not helping me. I love God, so why is this happening to me? That's how we feel. That's where we're at, in the middle of these situations. And maybe you've been there. Maybe you've been there, and in that moment, that verse does not help. Just so you guys know, don't do that. Read the 23rd Psalm, do something else. Don't do that. But it doesn't help in that moment. But just because it doesn't help in that moment doesn't mean this verse isn't true. It doesn't mean that this verse isn't true. It's absolutely true. But I think the only way it is true is when we choose to use the hurt and pain. Look at the last section of this verse. It doesn't say work for the good of those who love him and stop. It says this, who have been called according to his purpose. What that means is if we are living our life on purpose, following God, then we will take our pain and we will use it to help others. We will use it not as a crutch for us to be crippled the rest of our lives, but we will use our pain how we can push God's agenda for his purpose. And that's a choice. God says, I've given you free will. Pain is always going to be there. You choose how you're going to deal with the pain. You choose if you're going to live for me or not. What are you going to do with the pain? You see, we can't stop the pain, but we can find purpose in our pain. And that is ultimately the only redeeming way to solve this problem of pain in our life, is using our difficulties to help others. But we don't have to be in pain for eternity. That's the cool part about this. God says, take your pain and use it. Use it as a ministry. Help others. Share. Move them to God. But you know what? This is only temporary. You do not have to be in pain forever. And all we have to do is to know Jesus. That means that we have made him the Lord of our life, that we have repented of our sins and given our life to Christ. And when we know Jesus, we will be able to live pain-free forever. God fixes what we broke, but it's fixed forever. Have you ever fixed something at your house and then it broke again? And then it broke again? You tried the glue, then you tried the tape, and now it just looks like a big duct tape creation by the time you get done with it. Well, see, we messed up this world, but we can't mess up eternity with God. And that especially happens when you have kids. Again, break stuff over and over again. Eternity is perfect. We can't break it. Even my kids can't break it. We can't break it. You see, God has fixed what we have messed up, and he says, you get to be with me forever, and it will be perfect together. That's how God fixed the issue of pain. Not by taking it away today, because he can't take away pain if we have free will. But he's given us a place that is perfect forever. And when we know Jesus, we know a few other things also. We know forgiveness, we know love, we know real hope. When we know Jesus, we get to be pain-free forever. And we can have all of that when we get on base with God. And base stands for this, is to believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. A is to admit that I'm a sinner and I need a Savior. S is to surrender my life and say, God, you're in charge. And E is to express that in Christian baptism. And when I surrender, I say, God, when I'm in pain, I will use that for your glory. Now, I know many here have already made that decision. You've already gotten on base with God. Jesus is the Lord of your life. So here's our homework. Use your struggles to help others. What are difficulties in your life that may have kept you down, but you can use that experience to help someone who's having a similar struggle? You see, you have a choice. You can stay in the struggle and not look around and just go, oh, it's just me. I just got to deal with this. It's just me. Or you can be proactive and choose, I'm going to use this struggle to help someone else. I'm going to find someone else in this situation. And you'd be amazed at how much healing God does in your life when you choose to live for him through your pain. It's amazing how God works through us and in us when we are willing to use all of our life for His glory. And here's what happens. When we push through the pain and we come out of the cocoon, it's been hard, it's tough, it was a struggle, then we can fly like the butterfly for God. We can live the way that God has for us to live when we choose to push through the pain and the suffering and live for Him. You see, pain will never go away in this life. But you can have hope in the promise that we will all be perfect if you put your faith in Jesus. Let's pray.